Hello and welcome everyone to our Topic Tuesday webinar for today. We're excited that you are joining us to learn more about early high school grads in the process. We've got some great speakers that are going to be joining us and speaking on this topic today, and we're excited that you are joining us. So as you're joining this webinar, we've got kind of some intro information for you. Just general housekeeping. This is in webinar mode. So while we can't see your faces or hear your voices, we do want to still engage with you. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box that will allow you to directly communicate with the panelists if you have direct communication needs for any of us. And there is also a Q&A box. This is where we ask to put your questions, and the panelists will be able to either answer those live or type that answer throughout today's presentation. And as our friends are joining today's webinar, we have a question, a fun poll for engagement. How many credits are required for the traditional diploma plus the distinguished academic endorsement? So I'm going to launch that poll, and you should see it on your screen if you'll put that answer of what you think, 24, 26, or 28. All right, if you are joining us, we've got a quick poll question around traditional diploma with the distinguished academic endorsement. How many credits are required there? All right, most everybody has answered. Give everybody, if you're just joining us, a few more seconds for your poll question, and then we will launch those results. All right, about 5 seconds. All right, so we had a few with 24 and 26, but the vast majority is correct with 28. And we'll hear more about that from one of our speakers today. But as we are talking about early high school grads and their college enrollment process, I'll hand it over to Shannon to get the webinar started.
All right, hello everybody and welcome to the webinar. I'm Shannon Grimsley and I'm Assistant Director of Training and Counselor Outreach for the Woodward-Hines Education Foundation and the Get to College program. We are recording today's session and we will send a link to anyone who is registered. For those watching the recording, today's date is October 4th, 2022, and the material in this webinar is current through the 22-23 school year. In today's session, Helping Early High School Grads in College Enrollment, you will hear from April Washington with the Mississippi Office of Student Financial Aid and Heather Morrison from Mississippi Institutions of Higher Learning. I will now share a little background on Get to College and a few logistics about the webinar before we get started. Get to College is a nonprofit program of the Woodward-Hines Education Foundation. We have 3 centers in Mississippi, one in Jackson, Ocean Springs, and South Haven, and we help parents, students, and high school counselors with all aspects of the college planning process and financial aid, and all of our services are free. In our centers, we offer personalized college counseling appointments where we can tell students when to apply for admission and scholarship, help fill out their FAFSA, which just opened this past weekend, FYI. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid, or advise on essay writing and interviewing. As we mentioned earlier during the webinar, we cannot see or hear you, but you can ask us questions through the instant message at any time. Kirsten Dufour will be monitoring and replying to the Q&A today, and we will have a time for live Q&A with the presenters at the end, but do feel free to message us your questions at any time. I would now like to introduce our guest speakers for the day. April Washington is Assistant Director of Policy and Planning at the Mississippi Office of Student Financial Aid. April assists with the administrative responsibilities of state aid programs, reviews program rules and regulations to ensure appropriate administration, and monitors legislative bills pertaining to state aid. Before joining the Mississippi Office of Student Financial Aid, she served as records coordinator for the Financial Aid Office at Mississippi College. April earned an MBA from Mississippi State University and a Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration with an emphasis in marketing from Mississippi College. She is currently working on her doctorate degree, yay April, in higher education administration at the University of Southern Mississippi. Our next presenter is Heather Morrison. Heather currently serves at the Mississippi Institutions of Higher Learning and as the Director of P20 Partnerships and as the K-12 liaison for the Mississippi Department of Education. Heather's career also includes serving 19 years in secondary education as a classroom teacher, administrator, and as a district curriculum director. She received her BA and her MBA in history from Mississippi State University and an EDS in educational leadership from Mississippi College. Heather is currently pursuing her educational doctorate in educational leadership. So yay, Heather, lots of degrees going on here. So we are going to turn this over to you, Heather and April, and let you get the webinar started.
Good morning, everyone. I do see, well, I can't see your faces. I do see a lot of names that are familiar, and welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. I am going to, Shannon, I'm just going to share my screen for a minute and kind of go over what we discussed earlier today. Can y'all see my diploma options? Yes.
Yes, we can. We're good.
Okay. So earlier you had a poll question about the Mississippi diploma options, and we just kind of wanted to briefly discuss the diploma options and bring us to the premise of why we're here today to discuss early graduates. So as you know, last year was the first year that we had our graduates work towards the new diploma endorsement options, and every student that entered into the 9th grade cohort of 2017-2018 started off earning these basic 24 credits for the traditional diploma. You know, the alternate works with our SCD kids. I'm going to skip down to the endorsement areas that our students were able to earn. They were able to earn a career and technical endorsement, which focused on 26 credits and also focused on those students completing a career and technical endorsement area. And then our two other endorsements that students were able to earn was academic or the distinguished endorsement. Academic with 26 credits, so additional credits on top of the 24, and 28 credits for the distinguished. What is unique about these two is that the electives that students earn, 2 of the electives must meet what we call the IHL college preparatory curriculum, so that these students are already earning some of the electives that are required for admissions into our universities, our 8 universities. With these, there's slight little differences as far as for academic, the student has to earn at least a 17 sub-score in English and a 19 sub-score in math on the ACT versus that the distinguished endorsement, they have to meet the national sub-score requirements. They also have to take at least one AP class, an IB class, or Cambridge class, or a dual credit class during their time period, and earn a C or higher in the classes. It's not tied to a test score if they took an AP class. And the same for distinguished, however, they must earn at least a B or higher in one of those classes. So your correct answer earlier for the distinguished endorsement was the 28 credits. This 2-pager, for those of you that are familiar with MDE's webpage, is located on the secondary ed website, and we update it periodically. I do want to point out, though, for early graduation, students are not required to complete an endorsement area. However, we highly recommend that a student is on the right track and already earns an endorsement with graduation, early graduation. But it is not a requirement for MDE for the students to earn one. A lot of times I felt like when I went back to my K-12 world, sometimes early graduation happens and we weren't planning for it. A student may have a family situation, they may have a personal situation. And so it's best to meet their needs at the time for them to graduate early. And so that's why there wasn't a requirement for them to earn an endorsement area. So with that, and we're going to kind of tag team later, Kirsten and Shannon and April, as far as having a discussion about meeting the needs of early graduates. Even though, like I said, sometimes we don't necessarily plan for it. There are some students that say, hey, they want to come in, and maybe their sophomore year, they decide, I can graduate early and I need to go on and graduate early. then that's when it really falls on us to help them make those next steps out of high school into post-secondary education, whether that is the military, a 2-year, 4-year, or career technical. We need to be having those conversations that their education doesn't just end when we hand them their high school diploma. So with that, April, I'm going to stop screen sharing and turn things over to you.
All right, thanks, Heather. So, all right, perfect. Good morning. I am here to talk about the state aid piece. There we go. So we can move to the next slide. Today's agenda, we will be talking about the programs offered with our office, timeline for an early graduate, and your role as a counselor. So of course, I want to make sure I go over just the basics, our state aid programs, our need-based program, which is a HELP grant, higher education legislative plan grant. Most people know it as the grant that pays full tuition for our need-based students. The student must be Pell eligible, meet income requirements, have a minimum ACT composite or super score of at least a 20, have a 2.5 GPA, and also take the HELP core, which is the same as the IHL CPC. That grant pays full tuition each year. The Mississippi Tuition Assistance Grant is our primary residency grant. Students cannot be eligible for a full federal Pell Grant. It must have a minimum ACT composite or super score of 15 and a minimum 2.5 GPA. The grant pays $500 for freshman and sophomore years and $1,000 for the students' junior and senior years. The Mississippi Eminent Scholars Grant is our primary merit-based grant. The student must have at least a 29 on the ACT as a composite or super score and a 3.5 GPA. The grant pays $2,500 per year. Before we move to the next slide, I also want to mention our newest program, which is the Faith Scholarship. I'll get that added to your PowerPoint slides that we'll send to you. To be eligible for this scholarship, the student must be in legal custody of CPS at any time since age 13, a qualified residential facility at any time since age 13, or adopted from one of the two by age 13. Excuse me, after age 13. This scholarship awards full cost of attendance after all other grant aid has been applied to a student account. So this is a great scholarship program that's meant for students who have been in foster care. Basically allows them to go to college debt-free. Also, as a side reminder, for all students who receive state aid, they must enroll for at least 15 hours and meet GPA requirements. Next slide. So you can find all the information along with our application online on our website, msfinancialaid.org. Before we move forward, let's take a quick pop quiz and you can answer in the chat. What is the minimum ACT score required for the HELP grant? A, 18, B, 20, or C, 21? What is the minimum ACT score requirement? So we can move to the answers. The correct answer for that is B. The student must have at least a 20 on the ACT. Don't forget, we do accept super scores. We are seeing a lot of students, they may not have the composite score, but they do have the super score. So don't forget, we do accept super scores. All right, so I'm seeing in the chat, it says that the chat feature is disabled. We'll remember that for the next pop quiz because there will be another one. All right, so we're going to move on to the state aid timeline for your early graduates. what you'll see is it is a little different compared to your May graduates. So here we have a timeline for a student who plans on graduating December of 23. As you can see, the application opens for that student. Well, it did open October 1, this past Saturday. So therefore, the student will be completing the state aid application during their junior year technically. We want to make sure that students and parents are informed so they don't miss program deadline dates. As you can see, as I've circled, number 2 is the HELP deadline date of March 31st of 2023. So it's helpful if you can identify those students who plan on graduating early or have, shown some interest in graduating in December. It'll help if you do targeted outreach for those students to ensure they are aware of the application and document deadline dates so they can go ahead and apply and not miss out on state aid programs. Next slide. All right, so let's discuss the counselor to-do list. As previously mentioned, it's important that you identify your early graduates and encourage them to complete the FAFSA and MAP. The sooner the better, so students won't miss deadline dates. Number 2, it's important that you have access to MAP so you can do your part in submitting student information and viewing reports. If you're unsure how to use MAP, definitely give our office a call. That's why we're here. We don't mind helping. We want to make sure that you have the tools you need to help your students. Once you've ensured that you have access to MAP, that's where you'll submit ACT Composite or Super Scores and certify the HELP Core during the student's final semester. And the last piece, number 5, you will submit the student's 7-semester GPA. Now let's talk about the high school grade submission. So as I stated, an early graduate, it's a little bit different than your traditional May graduates. Because our office requires a 7-semester GPA, you will have to wait until the student has completed all coursework before you submit their GPA information to us. We know that many of you only have a few early graduates, so it may be more convenient for you to submit individual student information through MAP. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to create an actual grade file for those students. Whichever one is most convenient for you, we'll take it. Also, just remember, some of these students are choosing to enroll in college in January. So it's important that you don't wait to submit their information along with your May graduates. That will simply delay the student completing their application, which will delay us offering the student a potential award. All right, the next pop quiz. What is the MESG application deadline date for a December 23 graduate? Is it September 15th, October 15th, or January 1 of 2024? Thanks, Kirsten. Let's see what the results are. Perfect. Good job. It is September 15th. That is the application deadline date for MESG and MTAG. Next slide, Shannon. All right, so your contact person in our office is Mr. Brandon Johnson. He's our computer programmer. If you have any kind of questions navigating MAP, what needs to be in your file, he's your go-to person. So here's his phone number and his email address. Just reach out to him. He does not mind helping you all navigate MAP or any other issues you may have. Also listed here is our general contact information. Feel free to give that information to your students and your parents. Also know we have a contact form at the bottom of our homepage. If students and parents need to reach us outside of business hours, we return messages, every single one of them that comes through the contact form. So feel free to utilize it.
Hey, thank you so much, April, for that information, especially sharing with us that these early grads have a little bit of a different timeline than some of our other grads. So we wanted to turn it over. Any questions that y'all have, of course, put in the Q&A. But we want to turn it back over to Heather for just a second. We've had questions about how these early grads might be treated differently or not differently in the admissions and financial aid process. So Heather, we're going to bounce it back over to you for that answer.
We've had several conversations about, are early grads treated differently? In the sense of, no, they aren't. If they're going to meet our, they still have to meet admission requirements, whether it's through the CPC or through the other ways that you can complete for full admission, which is completing the CPC with a 3.2 or have the 2.5 high school GPA with a 50%, top 50% and the score of 16 on the ACT, or have a 2.0 GPA with a score of 18 or higher on the ACT, or meet the NCAA qualifications to meet. So the whole point is, even though they're graduating early, they still need to meet IHL admission requirements in order to be accepted into the universities. So with April talking about the 7th semester, sometimes they're finishing those last few CPC requirements in that last semester versus sometimes with their seniors, they've already knocked everything out of the way prior to their spring of their senior year. So it's particularly important to make sure that they are correctly scheduled in the classes they have for that fall if they're graduating in that December of 23. But again, I do think it's most important, we were having the discussion earlier, is even though while April can give you the deadlines for state aid, each institution has a little bit different deadlines for, and maybe admissions, or it may be their own personal or own individual financial aid components at the universities. So it's very, very important that you guide your student to make sure that they are looking at the institutions they are planning to apply to early, so to ensure that they're meeting the deadlines and requirements for the individual institutions. It gets a little bit hairy with that versus the whole group coming in, let's say for August admissions. Kirsten, did we talk about any questions that you might have had pertaining to this subject?
Yeah, so that was really the main thing, Heather, is that we've got a lot of questions kind of been coming through for the early high school grads, are making sure that they're, like you mentioned earlier, sometimes that is a result of something unexpected, of a lived experience. And so having those conversations really early with the students to understand that there are post-secondary options, but thinking about not just, like Heather mentioned, the admissions requirements, as long as they meet those, then they're going to be admitted to our IHLs. And then of course our community colleges have that kind of standard for their admissions processes as well, but also thinking about what it looks like for financial aid. And so that's why we brought these two experts together. And yes, it is reliant on the colleges to really ultimately determine their institutional aid, like those academic scholarships or some of those competitive scholarships, such as like a Lucky Day or a presidential type of scholarship. And so for your students that are graduating early because they have achieved everything early, there may be your high, distinguished academic endorsement students that are really wanting to start whatever their next step is early. We wanted to really open up the conversation more with you all as their advisors to say, hey, sophomore year, we really need to be having these conversations around your applications for post-secondary or whatever that looks like needs to be occurring your junior year. So we're backtracking really early, like in our high school, and if you think that that's something that you're going to be doing, like April mentioned, your FAFSA for your graduates that will be graduating early for the class of 23 should have been done, last year, their junior year. So the FAFSA, as well as the Mississippi Aid application, to be eligible to maximize those dollars, if they are going to be graduating a semester early, needs to be done their junior year. So while we focus a lot on those pieces for our seniors, and rightfully so, that's the majority of those students, we definitely wanted to put on everyone's radar kind of those conversations happening, early awareness. We know that you all are doing a great job of that, but making sure that that specific subset of high school students, I know sometimes students don't consider the fact that if I graduate in January, they're so excited to be done that they need to think about how does that affect if they're a full-time, first-time freshman status for some of those institutional dollars. April, Heather, do y'all have anything to add to kind of that early awareness conversation and thought for the counselors that have joined us today?
I just wanted to kind of go back on the district side of it. Also make sure that you're well aware, districts can have their own policies on early graduates for high school. So make sure that you're well aware, if you're a new counselor to us today and joining us and new to your district, that you understand your district policy and you understand what does that mean for an early graduate in your district, because you're dealing with two different components. So you're dealing with meeting your requirements for the district, but also trying to help that student make the next step for post-secondary access.
And I did want to add as well, you may have some students, they may choose to sit out, work, or whatever they may choose to do that spring after they finish. So just remember, those students will not have access to you. And those students who are taking that gap semester, that's a new application period. So they'll need to remember that they're going to have to complete another new application for the following academic year. So you potentially can have an early graduate. They may need to submit an application during their junior year, or you may have those who are planning on taking that gap semester. They may have to submit the application during their last semester, because that would be that October, it would be the application for the next aid year, beginning that following fall semester. So like I said, it can get kind of confusing, especially for parents and students. But just know those students who are taking that gap semester, they will not have access to you. So encourage them. I just simply say, when in doubt, fill it out concerning the FAFSA and the state aid application.
And that's a great point, April, and I might start using that tagline like today around those, but then also connecting your students with their recruiters early for the institutions. Like Heather mentioned, every institution has their own post-secondary institution kind of approaches the aid process of financial aid, and then maybe the programmatic process. Maybe they can be admitted to the institution, but there's an honors college program or a specific major program that they then may need to be aware of as not entering in a more traditional cohort time, how they handle those applications and such, because a lot of times our four-year institutions will have those special program applications that are going to be due in early spring of senior year. So, February, January timeframe, December. And so if a student is graduating at that time, we don't want them to miss those important deadlines if that's the institution that they're considering enrolling at, and then considering what that looks like for their program of study or their financial aid. So we wanted to highlight that they really, if you can, bring them in to connect with those recruiters, as they are the experts in their institutional field and can be a great ally for your students if they have specific questions. We don't expect y'all to be experts in all of our colleges. We want to make sure that you have the toolkit and the arsenal to be able to make sure that you appropriately connect your students. All right. Well, I thank our presenters. If you all have any questions, please put those in the Q&A. We just wanted to bring this conversation. We at Get to College learned some changes around the Mississippi Office of Student Financial Aid's awarding of some of those grants to early high school graduates. And so we wanted to bring this conversation to the broader scope, so that way hopefully you all learn something new today around the admissions, but then also the financial aid and the programmatic process for students. So Shannon, I'm gonna hand it back over to you, and I'll monitor if there's any questions that come through.
Perfect. Thank you, Kirsten, Heather, and April, for all the great information today. And that I hope that you all found this presentation helpful as you work with any students who plan to graduate high school early. We will email you the recording for this webinar in the next couple of days, and we will also post it on our YouTube channel. We would appreciate it if you would complete the short survey that will automatically pop up at the end of this meeting. Please fill this out and give us feedback on today's webinar so that we can continue to keep improving this webinar series. All right, whoops. All right, so stay tuned for our next Topic Tuesday webinar, which will be Tuesday, November the 1st. And during that webinar, we will be discussing the basics of successful grant writing for educators. We will continue this webinar series through the fall and spring. And if you participate in 5 webinars, you will have the opportunity to apply for 0.5 CEUs. And if you participate in all 10 webinars over the fall and spring, you will have the opportunity to apply for 1 full CEU. All of the remaining fall and spring webinars are listed on this slide. You can register for these webinars at our Get to College website. They are listed under the Educator tab and then choose Professional Development. While you're there registering, please check out all the other resources for you and your students listed under that Educator tab. So a few things that we've got coming up as far as training. We've got 2 more CCR teacher chats coming up at the end of October and the end of November. So if you want to encourage your CCR teachers in your high schools to attend these, they're really great, just kind of sessions where everybody gets together and talks about the successes or the challenges, or maybe a little bit of both, of what's going on in the CCR classroom. So we'll be having 2 more of those this fall, October and November, from 3:30 to 4:15, and these are virtual meetings. FAFSA training, as we mentioned earlier, the FAFSA opened this weekend. So for those of you who want to help your students complete the FAFSA, Kirsten and I are literally coming to you from a hotel room in Tupelo, Mississippi, because we will be here presenting FAFSA training tomorrow at the ICC Center in Belden. So it's not too late to sign up. If there are those of you in the North Mississippi area who would like to attend FAFSA training tomorrow, we will be here for your enjoyment and your FAFSA training tomorrow from 9 to 12. We'll also be in Greenville next week, and then at Pearl River Community College in Hattiesburg the very next week. But for those of you who can't make it in person, we will have a virtual FAFSA training on November 3rd. So feel free to join any of those, sign up for those, because we would love to train you on all things FAFSA so you can go out and help your students. All right, and so that's it for us today. If y'all have any questions, you can reach us at Get to College or any of our social media channels. So thank you for being here today, and we will see you again soon in November for our November FAFSA, or not FAFSA, our November Topic Tuesday. Have a great October, everybody.